Cyberpunk 2077 is getting pretty old. At this point, many of you have probably played the main story, maybe tried some of the most popular mods, and are just kind of tired of things. Well, in this video, I'm going to attempt to change that with a bunch of mods, including some very, very special ones, that'll give you a truly different experience with this game and hopefully freshen things up to the point where you want to play it again, start a completely new playthrough as it'll genuinely feel different. And the modding scene for Cyberpunk in general has been really doing some incredible things as of late. One of the big problems that comes into play with Cyberpunk 2077 towards the end game is you just become a god. It's the classic RPG issue. And really just by mid game you can steamroll basically all of the threats even on the hardest difficulty. But today we're going to fix that. Hardcore 22 Realistic Combat Overhaul is going to make the game a riveting and genuinely challenging combat experience. As in effect, what this will do is make it so enemies will take you out in just a few shots, but you'll also take out enemies in just a few shots, functionally making it so every single combat encounter in Cyberpunk becomes a real and genuine threat. I don't know, you could still run in game to your heart's content. Now you'll probably be punished for it, and this really works in practice. It definitely is recommended to add this on a new save for a new playthrough, or at least very early on into a playthrough so things work properly. But now getting into combat, you really have to keep your head on a swivel. A lot of the previously mundane components of combat, like a netrunner using overheat on you or a random thrug in the street, can now actually be deadly. And although you feel this as enemies are attacking you, it is really nice because it of course extends to your tools also. Grenades are incredibly valuable with this mod and can be imperative for clearing out enemies around corners, which are otherwise actually really tough situations now. And really all of the weapons of the game become pretty viable because that time to kill is so low, so it just kind of feels like you have a giant toolbox with a bunch of tools at your disposal, where previously it's like half of them or even more just weren't all that practical. And it requires you to think a bit more before going into combat. Sometimes if you just take that 10 seconds to plan things out, you can one-tap each of the enemies in a breeze. From a technical standpoint, the way this mod works is by setting most of the enemy's health to 100 as well as your own health to 100, and it'll largely stay that way unless you put points into your body stats. Armor is also no longer default on clothing and will only appear if you add armadillo mods to it, with weapons in general just getting some minor rebalances. To me, this mod makes Cyberpunk fun again on a new playthrough. It really feels like a completely different way to play the game and really opens your eyes to some features that you otherwise kind of just ignore or overlook. And seriously, that Netrunner location perk becomes invaluable, because overheat can literally delete half of your health bar in seconds. Thankfully in Cyberpunk you could just mod out enemies being able to reveal your position. But what about enemies that try and reveal your position in real life? Well, fixing that is also just about as easy as installing a mod, and that's thanks to today's video sponsor with private internet access. PIA has all of the great features and security that a VPN has to offer, but it also happens to be one of the best VPNs for gamers. Your ISP is probably slowing you down. They're throttling you, but private internet access allows you to bypass ISP throttling, get better pings, or even faster speeds. So maybe you'll be able to download that latest update to the Judy Romance mod faster than ever. Or hey, maybe that's not your thing. PIA can also help you just save money. Connect to a different region and find a whole wealth of game deals you would have never had access to. And yeah, sure, at this point you probably heard a VPN ad or two in your time around YouTube, but PIA does genuinely have some awesome features like all of their apps being open source and even some extras like split tunneling. So don't get hacked and get private internet access today, and actually get it for a little bit cheaper today. Because if you use my link down below, you can get an 82% discount and a 30-day money-back guarantee, so you can just kind of return it if things don't end up working out for you. Thanks to private internet access for sponsoring this video. But looking back at Cyberpunk, if you do want to make things a true challenge in this game and take away the get out of jail free card, you're going to need toxicity. This will make it so there are now restrictions on healing in Cyberpunk. By default, the way the mod works is as you use any of the healing items, you will build up toxicity, which on its own doesn't actually do anything. And you'll be able to see this with a brand new on-screen indicator in your top corner that will slowly count down as the toxicity wears off. But if you keep using healing items and stack this up to 4, at least by default, you will become too toxic, and in turn, you will not be able to use any other healing items for a set amount of time. In addition, this will actually have a debuff of making it so your character has half as much stamina and reloading takes 10% longer. And honestly, it's really simple. Use too many healing items, you build up too much toxicity, and then you can't heal anymore and you have a slight debuff to your character. But one of the really cool parts about this mod that I think makes it almost fun or usable by anyone is it's fully customizable. You can make it so it's not 4 healing items that makes you toxic, but actually 8 items in total. Or you could even just make it so you're limited to 1 item for a real hardcore experience. In addition, you can make it so the toxic buildup will wear off after just 1 level of toxicity goes away, so it kind of starts over there. Or you could make it so you have to lose all of your levels of toxicity, making it so you'll be blocked out of healing for a bit longer. I think this is a phenomenal gameplay edit. Healing in Cyberpunk is really just overpowered, and to me this is a very lore-friendly way to curb that, and actually gives you options in the game. You can try and pace things out, only use healing items sparingly, and try and not build up your toxicity level too much while still regularly healing. Or just use all the items in a pinch and then just have to kind of sit there and buy time or stay very defensive as things wear off. But overall, I think it is a really fun gameplay element, and even more importantly to some degree is it actually is a well implemented mod. But then we have a more broad reaching mod with the scissors difficulty options. This is basically going to be a bunch of gameplay edits packaged into one mod with the goal of making the game harder. It's kind of like 10 little mods in one, where you can turn each of these on or off as you like. 2 of the big ones are faster shooting for enemies and a new flinch mechanic. By default in Cyberpunk, enemies actually have a cooldown in between bursts of gunfire. So they'll fire and then have a set amount of time they have to wait before firing again. Naturally, one of the options is to remove that, making it so enemies will sling way more rounds your way and make things feel more like a proper war zone when you have several enemies firing at you. The flinch mechanic will probably be the most polarizing feature. It'll make it so when enemies do hit you, your character will flinch and be temporarily stunned so you can't really fire. In the slower paced gameplay, like when you have toxicity installed and you do have the hardcore mod so damage is increased, this honestly isn't that big of a deal. It kind of feels nice. If you actually do get shot, you will be momentarily flinched, but you're not getting shot that much anyway, because on those settings you're gonna die if you get shot even a few times. So it does feel pretty fun. But if you're not playing that way, and if you do get shot a bunch, you'll kind of just be like stun locked, where you can't really do much of anything. You'll just keep getting shot by enemies and be flinched permanently, unless you run away or try and get into some cover. And there are a ton of other options. You can disable enemies just popping up on the minimap, so you won't be able to see all of the enemy locations, which is actually pretty overpowered. You can disable V, automatically recovering from recoil, so you have to spend a bit more effort controlling your weapons. You can make it so those named enemies and the organized crime events are actual mini bosses. This is a pretty fun one, and it makes what is otherwise kind of just another NCPD scanner hustle into something a bit more interesting. This won't apply to all of the NCPD scanner hustles, but just where you get that enemy that has a plan they drop. And is a nice little change up as you get to one of these compared to all of the other gigs or side missions. You can make higher tier enemies like Netrunners or Mantis Claw foes pop up in the world a bit more often and have higher difficulty, like the ability to heal themselves. And that's not everything. Those are some of my favorite features, but there are more options even beyond that. And I feel like the faster shooting in particular can be a really nice addition to the game. It could really up the deadliness of the enemies, which at points could kind of feel silly or stupid. It makes the AI feel a bit smarter, and it's definitely a feature I like having in my game. But this mod in general is fun because it does make Cyberpunk 2077 more difficult in the way you want it to be. But how about instead of making the game a bit more difficult, we look at a mod that'll make the game a bit easier, or really just a lot less tedious. As next up, we do have NCPD Bribe, which is something that probably just should have always been in the game. This will give you the option for a fee to call an NCPD contact and remove your wanted level, as well as the police chasing you in Cyberpunk. It's actually a very simple mod and a feature that is available in many other games, but it really does make a lot of sense in this one. There's a lot of corruption in the world of Cyberpunk. You probably would be able to do this in reality in this world, and it'll be tiered, so the more stars you have, the higher the wanted level, the more of a cost it will be. And really the reason this is nice is that all too often occurrence where you're driving around, accidentally run someone over, and get the cops called on you while you're trying to fast travel somewhere or trying to do a mission. And rather than having to hide and wait a few minutes, this gives you a nice get out of jail free card where for simplest eddies you continue progressing normally. And last but certainly not least, we have what I think is actually one of the coolest mods I have ever seen for Cyberpunk. Let There Be Flight, which is currently in beta, so be warned, allows you with the click of a button to turn your vehicle into an AV, a flying car in Cyberpunk. This is one of those perfect mods that is both fun to mess around with, but also very practical in the actual gameplay loop of this game. And it's really simple. Basically, as you're driving around in a car, even not driving, you could be standing still, you hit a predetermined button and your wheels will literally turn into thrusters. This is not just kind of done in a jank way, but visually, things change on your vehicle. The level of quality and level of detail here is actually pretty surprising. It looks really good in practice. And as you do this, a new control scheme will pop pop up on screen. One of the pretty cool parts about this mod is it kind of has a more advanced mode and a easier mode. On the easier mode, you kind of just lift off and away. You'll still hit the regular gas and brake buttons to go forward or backwards, and there's just going to be a control for going up or down. It's actually quite easy to fly around in your car, and it is very practical to use. Although you can switch to drone mode, which is going to probably be about 10 times more difficult to control, but once you get the hang of it, this is where you could really do some epic things in the sky in Cyberpunk. This will make it so while flying around, you'll be more explicitly able to control your tilt and yaw. It's going to kind of give you that Z-axis more so than the other simpler mode. So things could end in disaster relatively easily. You can get flipped upside down or turned around in the wrong way, and it won't be nearly as easy to control. But once you do get the hang of the drone mode, you could get some really awesome shots and just some cool moments in general in this game. One of the fun parts about this mod is it is very easy and very quick to switch from flying to driving. So you could just be driving around to your quest and be like, oh, actually I have to go that way, or oh, I missed my turn, and just turn on the flying mode and literally just fly on over. Or maybe a bunch of enemies start attacking you, you don't want to deal with it, so you could quite literally just fly up and away and no longer have that problem. I spent probably a good 45 minutes messing around with this mod while I needed about 5 minutes to actually film this component of the video, and that's probably going to be your experience too. This mod is in beta, so it's not a perfect experience thus far, but it's pretty close. It is actually really well implemented. And the visuals too. As you're flying around, you can see the thrusters just being level or going forward or back depending on your inputs, which is a level of detail you just wouldn't expect from a mod like this. A lot of the crazier mods for Cyberpunk often feel kind of jank, like it's an awesome feature, but you know, it's rough around the edges. Not this one though, or at least not in my experience. It works really well. And I feel like this is a good sign as to the future of Cyberpunk. As more and more tools are released, as some of the existing tools continue to get updated, we're getting some pretty crazy things in the modding scene. With that said though, that's pretty much going to wrap it up for this one. Hopefully this inspired you to give the game another try, perhaps play it in a different way, or even just mess around with the flying car, because that's awesome. As always, again, I thank you all for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed this one, but with that, I hope to see you all next time. Later.